Following data import, in this video we will start our data transformations. The last step you should have completed was to connect to and import data from a folder source called International Sales. This function at the top of the query pane was created by Power BI. We can simply close it by clicking on the icon next to the folder. Before we get started, let's have a quick overview of the Power Query Editor. The editor gives you the tools and functions to be able to handle all of your data connections, data cleansing and transformation, and essentially organize the data ready for your end user. The Home tab shows some of the main options for our dataset. It includes adding and updating data sources, choosing and removing rows or columns, splitting and grouping columns, and options to combine multiple queries together into a single query. The Transform tab contains a bulk of the data editing functions. We can set first row as headers, set data types, replace values, pivot and unpivot columns, apply numeric calculations, and also create date and time related calculations such as age. The Add Column tab allows you to create a number of additional columns such as column from examples, which we'll look at shortly, conditional columns, and invoking of functions such as the one Power BI did earlier. The View tab is here to improve your view of the data. It allows for options such as showing white spaces, column quality and distribution, giving you a great first glance at the state of your data. Notice that the formula bar on this screen is checked. Take a moment to ensure you have this selected so that the formula bar appears just above your data. The Tools tab has diagnostic options for your queries, and there's a help option for online support and information. On the right hand side we have our Query Settings tab, and more importantly our applied steps. As you will see shortly, every change we make in our dataset is recorded as a step. This comes in handy the most when you receive an existing Power BI report and you want to understand the steps that have been taken to get the data to its current state. Okay, great stuff. Let's start with our data transformations. Navigate to the left hand side and in the query pane click the sales dataset. On the right hand side you can see that the last step taken on this dataset was change type. This was applied from the query preview screen in which Power BI detected data types based on the first 200 rows. Take a look at the zip column. It's been set as a whole number. We know that zip codes could be alphanumeric in some countries or regions, or contain leading zeros. Notice how the zip codes in these rows contain only 4 digits. Let's navigate up to the zip column. Click on the integer icon labelled 123 and let's select text. So let's click on the icon labelled 123 and select text. You'll get a pop-up for change column type, which asks if you want to replace or add a new step. We want to replace the current step because we want to change the assumption Power BI made earlier, which can be seen in the formula bar here. Click on Replace Current. As the pop-up disappears, notice how the data in these rows now have a leading zero, and the data type has now been changed in the formula bar. Let's navigate to the query name on the right hand side and update the name to have a capital letter. This will form part of our natural language query when published into the Power BI service. Navigate to the query panel on the left and click on Product Table. This is a product dataset, and if you recall we noted the empty cells in the Excel sheet. Let's handle these values by using the Fill Down option. Click on the category column header. From the top ribbon, click on the Transform tab. Find the Fill option in the middle and select Fill Down. So from the Transform tab, Fill and Fill Down. Notice how the null values are now filled with the appropriate category values. Let's take a look at the product column next. It looks like the product name and product segment are concatenated into one field with a pipe separator. Let's split them into two columns. This will be useful when we build visuals so we can analyze based on both fields. Right-click the product header, find split column and select by delimiter. Right-click the product header, find split column and select by delimiter. In the dialog box, make sure Custom is selected in the Select or Enter Delimiter drop-down. Power BI assumes we want to split by hyphen. Remove the hyphen symbol and enter a pipe symbol and click OK. Now that we have two columns, let's rename them. Double-click on Product.1 header and rename this to Product. Then double-click on Product 2 header and rename this to Segment. Column from examples. To the right of the query there is a price column that is prefixed with a currency code. To do any calculations we need a numeric value, therefore we need to extract the value from this field. This time we're using a tool called Column from Examples. Column from Examples is handy in scenarios where the pattern is more complex than just a simple delimiter. Let's carry that out now. From the top ribbon, click the Add Column tab and then click on Column from Examples. If you click on the drop-down, the option that we need is from all columns. You'll be greeted with a page that looks like this. In the first row of column 1, I'm going to type in 412.13 and click Enter. Once you hit Enter, Power BI tries to understand what you're trying to do and gives you a preview of the rest of the data. Following a few checks, you can agree and say yes, this is what I want. Click OK and this will create you a new column with a value extracted from the price column. Let's change the data type for this column. Click on the icon next to the column header and select decimal number. The price is now in the right format for calculations and aggregations. We can now remove the existing price column by right-clicking on the price header and clicking Remove. So right-click on the price header and click Remove. The next thing to do is rename the column. Let's right-click on the column header and find Rename and then rename to Price. Right-click on the header, rename to Price. Let's take a moment to review the applied steps. As you can see on the right-hand side, each action that we've performed has been recorded in our applied steps. We can step up to any level to see what action was performed at that point. This is very useful in that you can easily understand what transformations have taken place on any given dataset, and these are steps performed by Power BI each time the data is refreshed. Let's update the dataset name and remove the underscore from product_table. Once done, hit Enter. Let's move on to our geography dataset. From the Queries panel on the left, click on Geo. Notice that the first two rows are informational and are not part of the data. These were present in the Excel sheet that we reviewed earlier. Let's remove them so that we have a clean dataset. From the top ribbon, click on Home. Find Remove Rows and then click Remove Top Rows. So from the Home tab, find Remove Rows and then Remove Top Rows. In the dialog box that appears, enter 2 and then click OK. Notice the first row of the geography query is now the column header. Let's make it a header. From the Home tab at the top, find and click the option that says use first row as headers. Even though our last step was to promote the headers, Power BI has again predicted the data types as shown in the applied steps. Notice that the zip column has again been changed to an integer data type. Let's change this back to a text as we did earlier to avoid any errors when loading the data. Click on the 1, 2, 3 next to the zip column and select Text. From the Change Column Type dialog box, select Replace Current. So select the 1, 2, 3 next to zip, change to text, and then replace current. Okay, great stuff. Now let's move over to the right hand side and rename our query to Geography. Let's move over to our manufacturer query. From the query panel on the left, click on Manufacturer. Notice that the bottom 3 rows do not have any data. We noticed this in the Excel sheet we reviewed earlier. So now let's remove those rows from Power BI. From the top ribbon, click on Home. Find the Remove Rows, and this time we're going to select Remove Bottom Rows. In the dialog box that appears, type in 3 and click OK. We noticed earlier that the data in this dataset goes across the table. What we need to do is flip our data so that the rows are in columns and columns are in rows, and we'll do that using the transpose function. Let's do that now. Navigate to the Transform tab at the top, and just underneath click on the option that says Transpose. So from the Transform option, click on Transpose. And just like that, our data is flipped the right way. We now have our column headers in the first row. So let's navigate to our Home tab at the top. Find and click the option that says Use First Row as Headers. So from the Home tab, use First Row as Headers. Our query is now in a much better tabular format. Let's tidy up the query name by including a capital letter. Let's take this opportunity to update the manufacturer name. So right click on the manufacturer column header, click on Rename and rename to manufacturer name. This will allow us to distinguish between the manufacturer name and the manufacturer query. Now let's move over to the international sales dataset. From the query panel on the left, click on International Sales. If you recall, this is a folder data source that contains a number of CSV files. As you can see here on the right, Power BI has again changed type. So let's update the zip column. Click on the 1, 2, 3 icon on the zip header and select Text. So that's the 1, 2, 3 icon on the zip header and select Text. From the Change Column Type dialog box, click on Replace Current. If we compare the international sales and the sales table, we'll see that the international sales table contains 2 new columns, Source Name and Country. Let's click on the drop down next to where it says Source Name. You will only see Australia. By default, Power BI only loads the first 1,000 rows. If we click on Load More, we can then validate to see if we have data from the various countries. As you can see, the countries have been pulled through. Let's click on Cancel and continue. Please note that if your Load More option is still running, just click Cancel to exit. Because we already have a country column on the right hand side, we can remove Source Name. So let's right click on the Source Name header and click Remove. So right click on the Source Name header and click Remove. Now, to analyse the sales of all countries, it's more efficient to have a single sales table. We've got an international sales table and we also have a sales query. Let's join those together and make a single query. First of all, let's navigate up to the sales query. From the sales query, click on the Home tab at the top and then find the option that says Append Query. So from the Home tab, find Append Query. From the dialog box that appears, click on the drop down and select International Sales. Once selected, click OK. You'll see an additional column appear on the right hand side called Country. Since the International Sales query had the additional column for country, Power BI added the column to the sales table when it loaded the values from the query. You'll see that the column contains a lot of null values. These are all sales from the USA. We'll now add a conditional column to handle these null values. From the top ribbon, click on Add Column, and just underneath, click the option for Conditional Column. So Add Column and Conditional Column. In the dialog box that appears, let's change the name to Country Name. In the first option, let's click on the drop down and select Country. So if country equals, and then we'll type in null. Notice that I'm using the same case as the null value in the columns. If country equals null, then USA. Let's type in USA. Otherwise, let's click on the drop down here, select a column, and then select country. So it should read, if the country is equals to null, then USA. Otherwise, let's leave it as the country. Once you click OK, you'll see the country name column appear to the right, with all the corresponding null values containing USA. The original country column is now not required, so we can remove it. Let's right click on the country header and click Remove. Let's right click on the country header and click Remove. Now that we've appended the international sales with the sales query, we don't need to load the international sales to the data model. So let's prevent that from happening. In the query panel on the left, click on the international sales and then right click on international sales. Find the option that says Enable Load and click it to uncheck the option. The international sales query should turn light grey and into italics. Right clicking on international sales again, we can now see that we have disabled the load. The Include in Report Refresh option will stay checked, as we will still need to refresh data in the background. For now, we've come to the end of our import and data shaping operations. We're now ready to load the data to Power BI to visualize the data. From the Home option at the top, click Close and Apply. Home option at the top, Close and Apply. The data will now be loaded into Power BI memory. You'll see the progress dialog box showing you the progress of each table. Depending on the speed of your computer, this may take a few minutes. Once the data has successfully imported, we are now ready to create our visuals. We'll do this in the next video. See you then.